Hi, and welcome to the Lensrentals Podcast, where we talk about images and the people who make them. I'm Roger Cicala, the founder of Lensrentals.com.
Welcome to the Lensrentals Podcast. I'm Ryan Hill. I am here with Allie Acock Patterson.
Hey there.
And Kris Stewart.
Hello.
And we are going to talk about how to break a video camera today, or maybe more accurately, how not to break a video camera, hopefully. Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about our qualifications. Basically, we have all done tech support for Lensrentals, right?
Correct.
That's right.
Yeah. So if you have called in with a problem with your video camera in the last 3 or 4 years, you've likely talked to at least one of us. And I think we want to start with what to do before your shoot to lessen your likelihood of your camera breaking down in the middle of the shoot. What do you guys think are some steps that should always be taken ahead of time?
I would say definitely don't be overconfident in your ability to operate a camera you've never used before.
Mm-hmm.
Give yourself enough prep time to become familiar with the menu interface and some of the nuances, because even though they do similar things, record video, they're all very different from one camera manufacturer, especially to another, sometimes from model to model. And so I would say the most important thing is give yourself enough time to understand the tool you're using.
Yeah, and definitely hope for the best, but plan for the worst, as most things.
Mm-hmm.
If you are lucky enough to have an AC, they are going to probably build the kit and test it out a lot the day before. But if you're a person that's one-man banding it, that's your job. So you need to get the whole kit, build it up. And if it was my shoot and I really had a lot riding on it, I would round trip a whole little mini shoot through it before taking it on set. I'd want to build it up, shoot a couple of things in my living room or whatever, acting like I was on set, export that stuff like I was going to on set or when I got home, run it through the video editing software with the workflow I was planning. I do the whole thing and see in a little quick edited finished product, make sure it looks good, sounds good, all that stuff. I'm not saying you have to go too in depth with any of that work, but just make sure that all systems are functioning, at least mostly like they should be, before you go getting other people involved.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to catch yourself in a position where you've shot the whole thing, say, in an MXF codec that your computer won't open or something like that. Going back to the operating a camera that you are familiar with part, that's a very good tip. A really common call we get is, hey, I've been working with, say, a C100. And I want to kind of step it up for this project. What would you recommend? And the first thing I start with is work with something if at all possible. If you don't have any other constraints on what you're asking for, if you don't need 4K or you don't need high frame rate, base level, start with something you're familiar with. Definitely.
Also, commit to using the right camera. That's another thing. People try to use a C100 and they expect the footage to come out looking like a Red. And maybe you could in some platforms, but it's going to take a lot of customizing that image to be able to get it to look a certain way.
Right. Yeah, that's a thing we want to run into a lot with DSLRs too. People will call up and be like, I'm going to shoot a 10-day documentary out in the field and I'm going to shoot with a DSLR. How can I basically turn my DSLR into a camcorder? And just, if you can, don't do that. If you need to attach some sort of third-party device to your camera to run audio into it, but you still want to run audio in camera, I would instead steer you to a camera that has XLR ports.
Right. Or just using something like that as a B cam. Certainly if you want a really small camera, that can be more innocuous if you're in a very public setting or something like that. Make that your B or C camera and have one of those available for those shots. But as your main camera, have something more professional, has all the features you would need and the conveniences you would expect shooting that kind of material.
Right.
Also, media is a big thing. I would say if you ever have the opportunity to record to 2 cards at a given time,
Yes.
always take advantage of that. And it's going to make your rental a little more expensive, but knowing that you have that security backup card could ultimately save you so much money in recovery that it's worth the few extra dollars or whatever it's going to take to get that media. I know some media is very expensive, but if it's SD, if it's CFast, if you have 2 slots, use them both.
Yeah, it's the entire point of everything you're doing,
right,
to get this stuff. So like media protection is going to be a big theme here. You should format your cards in camera before you shoot, no matter what. Even if the camera recognizes them immediately, even if you think they've already been formatted, before you record a frame, format your card in camera.
Yes.
If you're doing backups on set, use a program that has checksum verification. If you're unfamiliar with checksum verification, it's basically a process by which the software that's copying your files from one place to another just double checks that everything has been copied correctly. So if there is an even like bit level difference in the information that was copied from one volume to another, you get an alert instead of later just finding out that your media is corrupted. Can you think offhand what are some of the other most common calls you get?
The viewfinder on Sony cameras, the eye detection, where if by default you're using the LCD and you trigger the eye sensor on the viewfinder, it will by default move the image from the LCD to the viewfinder, I assume to save battery power or something like that.
Right.
But people will call and think that their LCD is shorting out when in fact it's just rerouting the image to the viewfinder unless you program it to not do that.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of my favorite ones to take because it's a super simple fix. You just turn that automatic detection off. So
I find people get very annoyed when I tell them that. They're just like, they're actually kind of upset that all it is a button and that Sony would make it work that way.
Right. Yeah. Some Panasonic camcorders do that too. I can't remember the model number, but yeah, like if you have it on a tripod and you have the LCD flipped out and you walk near enough to the viewfinder to trigger that response where it's switching the video feed from the LCD into the viewfinder, you assume your LCD is broken when really it's just doing this automatic switch. And you can turn that off super easily in the menus.
Yeah, there's a few that do that from Panasonic. The one that comes to mind that we get the most calls about is the DVX200.
Yes.
That's the most common where they have that issue.
Yeah, because the distance is not right. Your face should have to be right up on that viewfinder. But like if you're standing within a foot of the camera, it triggers the switch.
Right.
I want to get into troubleshooting steps we walk through with people on the phone. So these are the kind of things you're probably going to hear us have you do if you call in with a problem. And if you're dealing with your own equipment, these are, some steps you can take to try to nail down exactly what the problem is. Because I think that's a major difference between troubleshooting video and troubleshooting photo equipment is that often a lot of the call, especially with a large setup involving multiple pieces of equipment from multiple manufacturers, is just trying to figure out what the issue is. Like this setup I'm having is not working and I can't figure out why versus like my lens isn't focusing. I know the problem. So what are some steps you take people through to try to nail down exactly what the issue is that they're having?
I'm going to let Kris start this one because I go to him whenever I have new product onboarding and I can't figure out how to make something work.
Sure. Well, the first thing would be the old turn it off and back on, or make sure it has power. If the thing is that it seems to not be working at all, make sure it's connected to power. If it is connected to power, turn it off and turn it back on. If that doesn't work, try a factory reset. From there, I would probably start comparing against other variables in your setup. Like you mentioned with video stuff, you could be using 30 plus products altogether that you think of as like your rig, quote unquote, or whatever. But actually, it's many different things, possibly made by different manufacturers with different standards and tolerances and all these kinds of things. And this doesn't just apply to electronics, but mechanical things as well. You want to start trying to isolate the problem and pick out individual things, parts of your rig that you can run a test on to figure out if they're doing their part in this equation. For instance, if the problem is you are not getting audio in your video, you've done the other steps of the turn off, back on, and the factory reset, you think the camera's set up to give you audio. So take the mic off, connect it to something else, and see if you can hear audio through it, if audio is coming through it. Check the levels visually on your device if it has that option, to see if the device is seeing levels and you're just not hearing them. Those kinds of things. Try to isolate individual components of the rig and narrow down through process of elimination where the problem is.
I think at inspection also, trusting that a variable is definitely not the cause is something that happens a lot. People say, I've used the same SDI cable to test all day and this camera's not outputting a signal. It's like, well, just for fun, let's double check the cable and maybe that's the problem. And sometimes that's the weakest link. And people get comfortable with stuff they've used over and over and over again. So they have a tendency to kind of put blinders up that could possibly be the problem. And usually I feel like people kind of jump to a conclusion of the object of least familiarity is what they assume is the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And kind of related to it, I think a problem a lot of people struggle with is an eagerness to blame any or all of the equipment for the problem that they're having. The fact of the matter is, especially when you're using a rig with so many components, there's probably something simple you're missing. This has happened to all of us at every skill level. You've missed a checkbox, you've missed a switch. This stuff happens. And one of the only differences between the tech that you'll talk to here at Lens Rentals and yourself and your own approach to this that might help you would be to approach it assuming everything works. Don't go in saying which thing is broken that I need to swap or replace. Just assume, at least for the first little while you're troubleshooting, assume that everything works fine. It definitely works fine, and you just need to track down the setting that isn't working. If you approach it with a willingness and even eagerness to give up on troubleshooting, well, you're going to be waiting for a replacement or running out to source something else and wasting a lot of time doing that when it could have been that 10, 20 more minutes of troubleshooting could have solved your problem and you'd be back shooting right then.
And it's frustrating. I get it.
Yeah.
Even from a support side, it's frustrating for me to try and troubleshoot things and not be able to solve it quickly. So I know in the field, it's extra frustrating. I've been in situations where I've had to troubleshoot stuff on the fly, and you've got that extra pressure if you are on set from people expecting you to get stuff working immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And so patience is a big thing. Just being able to take yourself out of the mindset of, oh my God, this has to be done right now. And allowing yourself the time it takes to really, like what Kris was saying, to really identify what the variable is. But you also mentioned people's own gear. I think the biggest issue trying to blend our gear with other people's gear is more often than not firmware related. Would you agree with that, Kris?
Oftentimes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. We'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, I want to talk about what will break a video camera and what to do when it breaks.
And now, Lens Rentals brings you a meditation moment. Close your eyes. Lean back and listen to my voice. You feel yourself getting sleepy. Relaxed. Drifting on a cloud. You love this podcast. You want to give this podcast a 5-star rating. You want to write a positive review of it and even subscribe to it. You know that will bring you a feeling of joy and contentment. When I count to 3, you will wake up refreshed and go straight to the review page. 1, 2, 3.
And we're back. I'm here with Allie Aycock Patterson.
Hi.
And Kris Stewart.
Hello.
We're going to talk about what will break your video camera. Pretty much all the same stuff that'll break your photo camera?
Gravity,
Yeah.
salt water.
Dropping it. Salt water. I think if you have heard our How to Break a Photo Camera episode, you have heard about the dangers of salt water. If you haven't, let's talk about why salt water specifically.
Just because it will, even if it doesn't make direct impact with salt water, if a camera makes direct impact with salt water, if you can get it to turn back on, it's probably not going to work for very long. But even just like extended exposure, like over time, will slowly start corroding the internals of a camera. At inspection, if we see a camera that shows some kind of trace corrosion around like an external housing screw, as a general rule of thumb, we tend to just turn it off and send it straight to repair so that they can open it up and make sure that there's no internals that we're potentially frying out just by leaving the camera running. So yeah, salt water is a pretty big one.
I think, too, one of the things that maybe videographers have to deal with that photographers have to deal with less are ports. In and out ports are used a lot more often on our video cameras, and those will go out occasionally.
Yeah.
The best thing you can do to avoid that is to support your cables, especially if there is a good amount of weight hanging off of it. I know, like, our 50-foot HDMI cables can get super, super heavy.
Yes.
And HDMI is a format that was never really meant for this kind of work at all. Yeah. So support your cables by just like zip tying them to the camera. Make sure you're not hanging a lot of weight off of them. XLR, HDMI, SDI, pretty much anything.
Yeah, give them a little strain relief. You can loop it over and zip tie or tape it somewhere on or near the camera so that if it gets jerked a little bit, that's not immediately affecting the port, but instead it's pulling that loop of cable. Worst case scenario is you break the cable itself, but you don't break the port on the camera, which is a lot more annoying to replace.
Like we mentioned before, another common problem we see, especially with SLRs that have been adapted to shoot video, is overheating. Because you're in the case of the A7 series, and especially like the older 5D stuff, you're kind of using a tool for a purpose it was never totally designed for. What are some steps you can take to hopefully avoid overheating?
Well, if you're not using a video camera that the company has said is a video camera, then it probably doesn't have an active fan, which is a problem. So we're talking about DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. Most of them don't have fans. If you're lucky, they'll have a rather large heat sink on the sensor. Some of the Sony cameras do. That was the big difference in the 5D Mark IV and the C-Log version of the 5D Mark IV. It wasn't just a software difference. Canon put a heat sink on the sensor that would stop the camera from overheating so much. But if you really want to shoot long-term with anything, you want it to be a real workhorse, you got to have a fan. There's no alternative. Even having a big heat sink still doesn't solve all the problems. It's not a camera that you can use constantly day in, day out without any problems, which is what you should be able to expect from a camera that has a fan. What you can do to mitigate it is, sadly, companies like Canon's response. If you call them up, especially out of warranty, but sometimes even in warranty, you call them up and say, my camera, it will record for 10 or 15 minutes or even 30 minutes, but then I get hot pixels or it shuts down or whatever your problem is. They'll tell you, at least as of a couple of years ago, the line was you need to give it twice as much rest as you use it for. So, and I think they were saying at the time, no longer than 6 minutes. This was with a 5D Mark IV, I believe, before the C-Log upgrade. It was, you can shoot for like 6 minutes and then you need to let it rest for 12. And if you're using it like that, then that's something that they will warranty repair. Like if the camera will produce hot pixels in that period of time, doing that, then they'll say, okay, we'll replace the sensor. If you're using it in any other way, then they're not going to repair that. And they say the camera wasn't designed for that. Despite all the advertising of it being a video camera and things like that, while it does have video features, without a fan, it's going to have problems.
Right. I mean, I've spoken with manufacturers who make photo style cameras with impressive video features like 10-bit 422 out. And it's kind of, as a consumer, especially, I'm looking at it going, well, why would you put this technology in this camera if I'm not supposed to use it this way?
Right.
And I think it's just, at the end of the day, it is a photo camera. Even if that manufacturer was able to pull off something cool in that size camera, they're probably developing it for a different product anyways. I mean, probably throwing it in a cheaper camera so that they can see how it does. I know Sony has done that in the past.
Yeah, they sort of want to have it both ways. And we're not talking about like recording for 6 minutes and then taking a break. We're talking about like turning the camera off, like
Right.
fully stop everything you're doing and
put it in your refrigerator.
Right. Yeah. And, basically limits you to indoors room temperature.
Also, don't put your camera in a refrigerator. Everybody listening.
Yeah, don't do that too.
That will probably break your camera.
What do we see in terms of manufacturers? And I don't want to get too specific or blamey here. What do we see break the most often?
Are we talking about user error or?
I think
certainly
like
drones
breaks.
Probably break a lot.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. Generally not recoverable.
No.
That's not always the fault of the drones, but since we have brought them up, we just say really quickly, with all these consumer drones, particularly from DJI, a lot of the convenience features they put on them, they're like, hey, this drone will land itself, or it'll fly itself, all these things. Those are what mostly crash them.
Yes.
When we talk to customers, they're like, yeah, I was flying it for 40 minutes. It was fine. Everything was great. I told it to land itself. It just exploded or it hit a tree or whatever it was. Like it's usually that is what the people report happening. And we've seen it happen here too.
I think we broke every drone that first rented to an employee.
Yeah.
Like the first round of drones that we carried.
For sure.
We broke all of them.
Generally, I try to steer people away from anything brand new for like a mission critical project.
Unless it's the Alexa Mini LF.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly, yeah. I mean, I think Ari has enough of a track record behind him that I would day one like work a paid gig with an Ari camera. But I don't know. There's just going to be, like we mentioned earlier with codecs, there are going to be some issues that need to be worked out with new firmware updates with pretty much anything. Blackmagic, we've blamed for it before, but they're not the only manufacturers. I think it's maybe not even malicious. I don't think people are being like, oh, well, we'll release this terrible camera and then fix it later. It's just issues come up in regular use that need to be fixed with firmware updates or patches or whatever. And you don't want that stuff catching you on a paid gig. So I would probably never use a camera for a job that was less than 6 months old.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Pretty much everything these days, the customers are kind of beta testing, and we ask for it. We're so ravenous for it. When is it coming out? I want it now.
Yeah,
release it soon. If they push the release date back, everyone freaks out. Like, we want it. We want it now. Give it to us. They give it to us, and we're like, this isn't ready yet.
Why did you send this
already? Why did you
already?
release this like this?
We're mad.
So yeah, considering pretty much everyone, the customers are beta testing things these days. I would let someone else do that for me.
Yep.
I'm not interested in beta testing the camera. If I was a YouTube influencer, then I probably would. But since I don't rely on a brand new product to further my career, I will just let someone else use it and find all the problems with it, and then I'll get it later.
By someone else, I mean probably us.
Lensrentals.
Honestly, yeah, we're going to have this thing brand new. We're going to ship it to people for 6 months, and those 6 months are generally us finding out what issues are with it
And giving them feedback.
Yeah, and fixing them however we can, or putting. You have seen Q&A warnings on our product pages probably, or checkout warnings in strong cases where we, find out there's an issue and then have to kind of warn people about it.
Yeah, Tear Deck, we got some Bolt 4Ks, and one of our first copies overheated when I tried to do our first firmware update on it. So we sent it to the manufacturer. They held on to it for about 6 weeks. By the time we got it back, they had a new firmware update that addressed the exact issue that we sent it in for. And that's not uncommon for stuff for us. I mean, I'd say that happens more regularly than it definitely should.
Tell your friends. Have everyone seriously call in if you have any questions about new products or existing products, and we can tell you what customers tell us about it and what we've seen ourselves, and we don't hold back or censor. You think we're outspoken on podcasts about things we don't like?
That's true. Yeah.
Talk to Kris on a call.
Get us on the phone. Let's talk one-on-one.
Also, if you're getting something new, I know right now it sounds like we're telling you not to use it. Use it with caution for sure. But we're also very happy to accommodate most of your requests within reason. So if you're wondering, does product A work a certain way with product B? If we have it available, we're going to be happy to test it for you and just kind of help. We have a new product, the Bird Dog keyboard, and it does some funky things sometimes depending on certain configurations. And so we just tell the customer, you probably want to give yourself a day to set this up. And if there's any specifics you'd like us to test before it gets there to help you save some time, we're happy to do it. And we're not going to say it's going to work necessarily. We're just going to let you know what to expect.
Right. Yeah. If you need something tested ahead of time, we can do that within reason. So if your camera does break on a shoot, you're positive it's broken, you've tested other components. What is your next step if it's a rental? If it's a rental from us, say, I'm going to give the people very specific directions.
Sure. Well, if you're renting from us, you're probably, unless you just destroyed it and are certain that you've done that, you've seen it run over by an 18-wheeler or something. Unless that's the case, then you've probably already been talking with us and troubleshooting. Possibly you troubleshooted with the manufacturer first. Even if you did that, we're probably going to want to troubleshoot with you again here. Because sadly, a lot of the manufacturers, at least for the lower level equipment, they send everything to call centers, and they're just going to read the manual to you, which actually can solve a lot of problems, and that's why they do it. But we can help you out a little more here and try to see if there's anything we can solve that they couldn't, which is often the case. But assuming you've talked to us and we couldn't solve it, the best we can do, unless you're in one of our locations where we have a facility in town, which would be Memphis, Tennessee, or Nashville, Tennessee, or Boston. Unless you're in one of those towns, then we're going to have to ship you something overnight, which we can do for pretty much every day except for Sunday. You can't receive something on Sunday, but Monday through Saturday, we can get you something overnight for those days. So it's good of you to have some kind of backup plan available if that has to be the case. So have a B camera, even if you don't think you need a B camera, have one. If this is a very high-end shoot, have a second full rig. We have a lot of customers that'll have 2 complete A camera setups before they even get to something they would consider a B camera. So yeah, right. Peter Jackson's 48 red cameras for shooting The Hobbit. Not all cameras are being used.
Right.
And to what Kris said about calling us first, if it is a product, say like the live stream switchers, that we really do get stuck and we think maybe the manufacturer's troubleshooting could be more helpful than what we have, for whatever reason, we'll tell you that. We're very straightforward about this is what we know this far. And if it's a manufacturer that's not going to provide you any helpful troubleshooting tips, we can tell you that on the front end if you call us first. Also, if you think you can fix a camera, you just really need to evaluate, I think, your own skill sets before maybe attempting troubleshooting stuff before calling us. Because a lot of times people will try to troubleshoot stuff without ever giving us a heads up of what's going on. And sometimes they kind of work themselves into a place that, they've dedicated 5 hours to trying to do firmware updates or doing this, that, and the other. And they call us and it's a simple fix that, maybe 10 minutes we could have gotten you sorted out. But you dig this hole, and I have to bring it up because this is my favorite example. Someone rented a Blackmagic Ursa Mini with the wrong mount. I think they rented it with the PL and they wanted an EF. They did not call us. There was a problem where a guy walked out of a garage with his friend still inside, And the guy took a Dremel to the camera mount, thinking he would shave off the PL parts and make it possible to mount a Canon camera. That guy should have called us first. Sorry. That guy should have let us know that he had a problem.
Yeah.
We could have just sent him a replacement order instead of him having to buy a camera that he will never be able to use.
Yeah. Definitely don't do that. If you're going to take anything away from this podcast, please don't take a Dremel to any camera mounts. And I want to make clear, I don't want to make this sound like a commercial for lens rentals. That's like the last thing I want these podcast episodes to be. But I should make clear that we will send you a replacement regardless of what the problem is.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't have to we don't have to confirm over the phone that it is not user error or that it is not your equipment that you've gotten from another source. As long as you take basic troubleshooting steps with us, if you call us and, your camera's not working, whether it's your setup or a legitimate problem with our gear, it doesn't really matter. We will ship a replacement order no matter what.
Yeah. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we understand how complicated video equipment is, and we just want your shoot to go as well as possible.
Yeah. So commercial over.
Yay. Now we can talk shit about Black Magic, right?
What should you do if you have a video camera and it breaks and you have not rented it from us? What are our manufacturers
rent from us helpful? Next time?
Yeah, there you go.
Some are more helpful than others, I think. Some manufacturers, the thing that makes me the most upset is when a manufacturer knows there's a problem and refuses to acknowledge it, and then they secretly release something like with Teradeks a few weeks later, and it's like, why didn't y'all just acknowledge the fact that this was a problem and y'all were investigating it? You don't have to have the solution right then. If you smash a camera, you probably just need to buy a new one and cut your losses. Maybe find a different hobby or career, perhaps. But Kris, you work with a lot. You're almost in manufacturing at this point.
Yeah. Well, this kind of connects to the larger issue of right to repair, which you should Google that now if you aren't well familiar with it, because it's
I'm on their email.
Yeah, it's a pretty contentious issue at the moment. A lot of manufacturers over the last decade or so have become complacent making things that are basically disposable. They don't want to repair them. Repair has always been a loss leader for their business. It's much more profitable to just have people buy more things when the things they own go bad. So they're making them less and less repairable. And that's certainly true for most consumer electronics, but also some more professional stuff these days too, sadly. And we experience a lot of camera manufacturers, they won't sell individual parts anymore for things. You have to get assemblies. So a good example is a prosumer camcorder that costs about $3,000, say. The lens stops working right on it. Something's wrong with the lens. Maybe it won't zoom or won't focus, or an element cracked when you dropped it, something like that. You can't buy the single part that you need, even if it's something very simple. You can't buy that part. What you can buy is the whole lens assembly, which in the case of like a $3,000 video camera might be as much as $2,500. And so now you're buying this thing and you're paying, if you can't repair it yourself, you're paying a repair facility labor to fix that. And it becomes more expensive than getting a new camera. And the thing is, that's by design. It's sad, and I certainly am very unhappy about it, but that's not a mistake. It didn't happen by chance. Right. We haven't just drifted into this. It's happening on purpose. So related to this issue, I would have you Google right to repair and support right to repair laws.
Yeah.
I second
in your local district. But yeah, that's the main thing is just if you've broken the camera, like Allie said, if it's demolished, you've got to buy a new camera. There's no way it's going to be cost effective to repair it. And really, if any significant damage has happened to it, it's not going to be cost effective to repair. The best you can do is sell it for parts as is on like eBay and buy a new one. If it's a small thing, though, then reach out to the manufacturer and send it off to them. And especially if it's not your fault, if this is a warranty issue and the camera is within warranty, contact the manufacturer, send it to them. It's not going to be a fun process. We've got a lot of experience with these repair facilities. A lot of the companies outsource them now. Most do. And it can take a long time and be a frustrating process to get this stuff repaired. But it's definitely more cost effective than buying a whole new camera just because something broke on it that shouldn't have.
Also, the repair support, I think, a lot of times is kind of on tier with the camera itself. Like I'd say VRI's support, Amtech, is pretty amazing. They're super responsive. We had a camera with an issue recently, and I called them and said, we're a rental house. We have an order for it going out this time. And they said, we're going to send you our basic troubleshooting steps. If that doesn't fix it, we want it immediately so we can get it back to you on time. And that is a rare thing when you're dealing with the manufacturer service centers. But yeah, just wanted to shout out for them really quick because that's something we're actively working on. And I was immediately impressed with, not only did they say, here's how you can maybe fix it. And if this doesn't work, we want it right now. They also immediately sent me an email that said, here's an extended warranty.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's like, wow, I just wish everyone could work this way. But I guess that's what happens when you buy a, $60,000, $70,000 camera?
Yeah, I think with our licenses and stuff and like the cage and the mounts, it was like close to 90.
Yeah, you deck them out. That's
for
sure, Ryan.
So, yeah, 90 grand will get you pretty good customer service. But that is a legitimate thing. Not everybody obviously is in a position to be able to make a camera choice based on that, but it is a consideration. Like Ari read a different level of spending money will get you a different level of attention.
Yeah.
But also, it doesn't have to be that way. Again, not too much. Right to repair.
We are going to link to that stuff in the show notes.
For everything.
Yes.
Everything could be that good of an experience getting repaired. You could have a reasonable expectation to have quality repair service inexpensively if you fight for it in the legal system.
And there are companies that on occasion do pretty good knockoffs. Like we get some of our stuff through Alibaba because, like GoPro, they will not fix anything. And if it's something really simple, like a hinge on a battery door broke or something, we can't just let a camera not be usable because of that, but we also can't rent it that way. And so there are companies out there who are happy to take that knockoff and do what the main manufacturer is not doing. But there is a little bit of trial and error if you go that route. You could also maybe email Lens Authority and we might dig through our graveyard of parts and see what Sony, EX1 piece you need. I have basically the metal housing of a PMW 300 at home that I often look at and wonder what that filter gel wheel is worth to somebody out there.
Yeah, we'll sell you some parts.
I mean, I have it because it looks cool and it was $50, but every once in a while I'm like, I wonder what I could get for that main chassis right there.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, I think that'll about wrap it up. We'll link to Right to Repair stuff in the show notes.
Chris and I have never even had a conversation about it.
We'll go break some windows.
So happy that he talked about it.
All right. Thank you both for coming in.
Thanks for listening to the Lens Rentals Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, let us know at podcast@lensrentals.com. Today's quote is from Rachel Morrison. Life is unpredictable, and I feel to some extent, lighting and cinematography should be a reflection of that.